With the exception of the deep-sea hydrothermal vent ecosystem, all the life on Earth depends on photosynthetic organisms that convert light energy from the sun into chemical energy that is utilized by all living things. Autotrophs is the big fancy word for primary producers. These are organisms that produce their own energy, like plants. Organisms that eat other organisms are called consumers, like us. In fact, all animals are consumers. We are all in one way or another dependent on plants for our livelihood. And the big fancy word for consumer is a heterotroph. And the miracle structure that provides energy for nearly all life on Earth is the chloroplast. The process of photosynthesis takes place in the membrane of the thycaloid. Remember, the thycaloid is the pancake-looking structures inside of the chloroplast. And do you remember what the molecule is that makes plants green? It's chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is all over the membranes of the thycaloid. Photosynthesis is a chemical process. At the membrane of the thycaloid, a chlorophyll molecule gets excited by light from the sun. No, really, it actually gets excited. So excited that it breaks the bonds of carbon dioxide and water and recombines them to make sugar and oxygen. At the heart of it, that's really all photosynthesis is. Alright, so you're not chemically minded. Don't stress about it. Let's think about it in terms of plant anatomy. Here we have a cross-section of a leaf. Leaves are actually quite spongy if you look at them in cross-section. And the reason is because they need a lot of space for carbon dioxide to come into in order for photosynthesis to occur. Air enters the leaf through a tiny hole called a stoma. And inside of the leaf is where the carbon dioxide molecules cross the membrane of the leaf cells and combine with a molecule of water. But wait, where did that water molecule come from? Water comes up through the roots of a plant and gets dispersed to all the cells in a plant. And then it gets dispersed through a vein network that runs throughout the plant. And when water comes into contact with the leaf cells, the water molecule combines with a carbon dioxide molecule in order to create glucose and oxygen. Oxygen is a waste product and builds up and leaves through the stoma just like the carbon dioxide came in. And then the sugars that are produced in the leaves can enter the vein system and get redistributed to the rest of the cells in the plants, like the roots. Photosynthesis is kind of like the complement of respiration. If photosynthesis is Desi, respiration is Lucy. If respiration is peanut butter, photosynthesis is jelly. They really just kind of make each other whole. Recall that in respiration, energy is generated by breaking down a sugar molecule. The kinetic energy is released from the sugar molecule as electrons fall down in the electron transport chain. This falling of electrons creates kinetic energy from chemical energy in sugar molecules. Well, where do those sugar molecules come from? You guessed it, photosynthesis. Chemically, photosynthesis is exactly the reverse of cellular respiration. In photosynthesis, carbon dioxide chemically reacts with water in the presence of light energy to produce sugar and oxygen, whereas respiration uses sugar and oxygen to synthesize ATP, creating energy for the cell, and provides the byproduct of carbon dioxide and water. In respiration, kinetic energy is used from potential energy. That potential energy was generated during the process of photosynthesis, essentially by reversing the electron flow and storing the energy in the molecule of glucose.
Plants provide us with food to eat and oxygen to breathe. They perform this amazing feat by the process of photosynthesis. Let's take a closer look. Photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide, which diffuses into the leaf through small pores and then enters the cells. Inside the cell, carbon dioxide diffuses into the chloroplasts, where photosynthesis takes place. Chloroplasts use energy from light to transform carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. Zooming into a chloroplast, we see these flattened membranous sacs called thylakoids. Here, light energy is converted to chemical energy in the first phase of photosynthesis, the light reactions. The two green structures you see here are photosystems, large complexes of proteins and chlorophyll that capture light energy. An electron transport chain connects the two photosystems. Notice the small mobile electron carriers that shuttle electrons from one large complex to another. Now let's take a closer look at the steps of the light reactions. The photosystem on the left absorbs light energy, exciting electrons that enter the electron transport chain. Electrons are replaced with electrons stripped from water, creating oxygen as a byproduct. The energized electrons flow down the electron transport chain, releasing energy that is used to pump hydrogen ions, the blue balls, into the thylakoid. In the photosystem on the right, light energy excites electrons, and this time the electrons are captured by an electron carrier molecule, NADPH. The high concentration of hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid powers ATP synthase, producing ATPs. The light reactions in the thylakoid have produced two energy products, ATP and NADPH, that will now power the production of sugar in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes place outside the thylakoids in the stroma, the thick fluid of the chloroplast. At the beginning of the cycle, carbon dioxide molecules combine with molecules called RUBP. The resulting molecules go through a series of reactions powered by ATP and NADPH from the light reactions. Sugar molecules known as G3Ps are produced. Most of the G3Ps are rearranged back into RUBPs that will begin the Calvin cycle again. But the important product of photosynthesis is the remaining G3P sugar. Some G3Ps are used to build glucose, which can combine into starch or cellulose. Still other G3Ps form sucrose. And some of the sugar is broken down by cellular respiration using oxygen in the plant's own mitochondria, generating ATPs that can power other work of the plant. Excess oxygen diffuses out of the leaf through the pores, while more carbon dioxide enters. With three simple ingredients, carbon dioxide, water, light, plants produce sugar and oxygen by photosynthesis, powering plant metabolism and ultimately providing your fuel as well.
All right, there are two different stages of photosynthesis, but let's start out by saying let's not get scared of all the chemicals flying around here, and let's take some time to break it down. There are two different stages of photosynthesis, the light stages and the dark stages. It has been argued that these are really an accurate description. The reason that they're called light stages is that these reactions require light to occur. Well, that's fair enough. The confusing part comes with the so-called dark reaction. The name infers that they only occur in the dark, and that's not really true. They can actually occur in the dark or the light. Thus, these reactions have been renamed as light-independent reactions. But we'll talk about light and dark reactions, but you can just really call them light-dependent and light-independent reactions. Okay, so what are light reactions? Remember the parts of the chloroplast? There are two membranes, and inside those membranes there's some liquid, and that's called the stroma. And the short stacks are called grana, and the pancakes are called thylakoids. The first stage of photosynthesis occurs on the membrane of the thylakoid, and this is where the true magic happens. It is where physical energy in the form of light gets converted into chemical energy that all organisms on Earth need to live. And I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty magical. In the light reactions, there are three different reactions. At the membrane of the thylakoid, light from the sun hits a water molecule and splits it into a hydrogen ion and oxygen gas. Then, the hydrogen ion hooks up with the NADP ion in order to synthesize NADPH. And NADPH can be used during cellular respiration to create energy, much in the way ATP can. When that water molecule splits, it also releases an energy packet that is used to synthesize an ATP molecule. That process is known as photophosphorylation. All right, just to make everything a little more interesting, the second stage is historically known by three different names. It was originally called the dark reactions, and then it's been redefined as the light reactions, but they're also known as the Calvin cycle, named in honor of the researcher that discovered them. While the light reactions occur at the membrane of the thylakoid, the light-independent reactions in the Calvin cycle occur in the liquid medium of the chloroplast, the stroma. To review, The light reactions use light energy to split water into hydrogen ions, H pluses, and also create chemical energy sources, ATP and NADPH. And oxygen gas is released as a byproduct. The energy sources created from the light reactions are ATP and NADPH. These chemicals travel into the stoma and serve as the chemical energy that converts carbon dioxide into a sugar. And there are several steps to the process which I won't go into detail here. The important point is that carbon dioxide enters the Calvin cycle in the presence of chemical energy of ATP and NADPH and produces sugar, specifically glucose, from carbon dioxide. The colors we see every day are a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. This spectrum includes radio waves, microwaves, infrared rays, ultraviolet rays, X-rays, gamma rays, and visible light. These different electromagnetic waves differ by the distances of their wavelengths. Where radio waves have really long wavelengths, X-rays and gamma rays have really short wavelengths. With our eyes, we can only see a very narrow range of the electromagnetic spectrum. This range is called visible light. And the reason that we see different colors is because of differences in their wavelengths. Things that look really dark refract the shortest wavelengths that we can see with our eyes, whereas really dark red refract the longest wavelength we can see. And as it turns out, of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, visible light is the most important range for photosynthesis. Color also depends on the absorption of light of a substance. If all the light is captured by an object, it is said to be 100% absorbed, and that object will appear black. If none of the light has been absorbed by an object, 100% was refracted, and it appears to us as white in color. So why are plants green? The sun emits wavelengths of all colors in the rainbow. So in essence, if you could look directly at the sun, it would be white. And the reason plants are green is because they absorb all colors of the light spectrum except green. So why is a red flower red? Well, because it absorbs all colors of the light spectrum except, you got it, red. All right, we got to get a little more scientific about this. Here we have a graph of absorption of light by the three most important pigments in plants. On the y-axis is the amount of light absorbed, and on the x-axis is the wavelength of the light. And they were nice and showed you what color actually corresponds with the number of wavelengths. Let's start with chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is a molecule that absorbs the extremes of the visible light spectrum. It absorbs dark violet to blue on the low side of the spectrum, and red colors from the higher side of the spectrum. So if you looked at a pure sample of chlorophyll A, it would actually look blue-green. The reason it wouldn't look pure green is that the wavelengths between blue-green and green are not absorbed, they are refracted. So in that way it would actually be blue-green in color. In fact, cyanobacteria used to actually be called blue-green algae, though it turns out they aren't actually algae. But the reason these bacteria look blue-green is because they only have a molecule of chlorophyll A, they don't have chlorophyll B. In real algae, green algae to be specific, chlorophyll A somehow got changed to be a very similar but very different molecule, chlorophyll B. And it takes over where chlorophyll A left off. It absorbs wavelengths in the colors blue, green, and orange. Therefore, if you look at a pure sample of chlorophyll B, it would look kind of yellowish green, sort of like pea soup. Carotenoids are another group of plant pigments in chloroplast that you might not have heard of. And carotenoids have two main functions. They help absorb light from the sun to go through photosynthesis, and they protect chlorophyll molecules from getting damaged by the sun. Carotenoids absorb the cool colors from violet to green, and when you see them by themselves, they appear yellow to orange in color. What kind of vegetable does carotenoid sound like? Did you guess carrot? Well, carrots are full of carotenoids that give them that wonderful orange color. In fact, carotenoids were first discovered in carrots. In the autumn up north, we are blessed with a beautiful show when the leaves change colors. The reason this happens is because the chlorophyll molecules are getting reabsorbed into the stems of trees. but the carotenoids are left in the cells and the leaves. And since they reflect yellow and orange, those are the colors that you see in the autumn up north, yellow and orange. Throughout the evolutionary history of plants, 3 different variants of photosynthesis have developed. It is thought that the original land plants were C3 plants. They're called C3 plants because the first product of the light reactions is a 3-carbon molecule. But I'll spare you the chemical details. You're welcome. No, really. Trust me. You're welcome. But there is an anatomical difference between the different types of photosynthesis variants. And it all has to do with the stomata. Stomata are specialized structures in land plants that allow air to move into and out of a cell. Think of it kind of like the lungs of a plant. The singular of stomata is stoma, and each stoma is formed by specialized cells called guard cells. In the bottom photo is an example of a closed stoma and an example of an open stoma. On especially hot and dry days, the stoma close of C3 plants. This has a major advantage of conserving water within the plant because water is not lost through the open stomata. However, this advantage has a serious cost. It doesn't let carbon dioxide gas into the leaf, and without carbon dioxide, the chloroplast doesn't have the raw material to make sugar. It doesn't have carbon. However, the chlorophyll and the chloroplast are still going through their chemical reactions. So instead of carbon dioxide going into the Calvin cycle, oxygen gas is used. Remember, oxygen is produced as a byproduct in the light reactions. And when the stomata close, the oxygen levels continue to build up in the tissue of the plant. When oxygen enters into the Calvin cycle, it produces nothing of benefit to the plant. It isn't able to produce sugar because there's no carbon molecules. And it costs the plant the use of ATP. And this process is known as photorespiration, and it's a really big problem in plants. Plants that utilize the second variant of photosynthesis are known as C4 plants. This is because the first product of the light reactions is a 4-carbon molecule, but I won't go into the details of chemical reactions. You're welcome. No, really. Trust me, you are welcome. Photorespiration is so inefficient that plants evolutionarily developed 2 ways to minimize the effect of this process. In C4 plants, there is a spatial separation of the photosynthesis steps. In the one I'll discuss in the next slide, there is a temporal separation in the photosynthesis steps. But let's focus on C4 plants for now. In C4 plants, carbon dioxide is fixed in the mesophyll cells of the plant. As you can see in the diagram, the mesophyll cells are the cells that are in the middle of the leaf. And in fact, mesophyll literally translates to middle leaf. These cells are, in effect, acting as a carbon dioxide concentrator. The reactions that take place in the mesophyll cells require energy in the form of ATP, but their benefit of increasing carbon dioxide concentrations are well worth it. And the reason is because it limits the effect of photorespiration. Carbon dioxide diffuses across the membranes of the mesophyll cell into the bundle sheath cells by simple diffusion. It moves from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. The bundle sheath cells are a layer of cells that surround the veins of plants, and the veins of plants are called the vascular bundle. At this point, the carbon dioxide in the bundle sheath cells goes through the rest of the process. It completes the Calvin cycle and produces sugar for the plant to utilize. This process is very beneficial for plants that grow in really hot environments battered by intense sun. The only real disadvantage of this process is that carbon concentration in the mesophyll cells costs additional ATP. So in areas that are cooler and wetter, this C4 process does not tend to be more efficient than the C3 process. This is because C3 plants don't really have to close up their stomata very often. In areas of the world that are really hot and really dry, another form of photosynthesis has evolved. Where C4 photosynthesis had a spatial separation, CAM plants have a temporal separation. Oh, and by the way, CAM stands for the crassulacean acid metabolism. Crassula is a genus of plants that this process was first discovered. And the most well-known can plants are cacti, but they include many plants of the world that have the succulent characteristic. Can plants take advantage of differences in temperature between night and day to minimize water loss, but maximize carbon fixation, and therefore minimize photorespiration. At night, these plants open their stomata, letting carbon dioxide out and oxygen in. When carbon dioxide enters into the plant, the mesophyll cells fixes it and holds on to it. Then, as the light shines down, the stomata close so as not to lose any precious water via transpiration. But at this time, the Calvin cycle kicks in, converting the carbon dioxide into glucose. The biggest advantage of this is that there is much less water loss through the stomata because they're open when it's relatively cool outside. The biggest disadvantage of this is that these plants can only absorb about half of the amount of oxygen as C4 plants, because they're only open about half a day. Therefore, these plants tend to be very slow growing, but slow growing is better than no growing if you know what I mean.